He drained every dollar I had, 80,000 gone in one transfer. No warning, no apology, just silence. A week later I saw the pictures. My son, his wife and her mother smiling under the Roman sun, glasses of champagne in hand, paid for with my life savings. People told me to call the police, to make a scene, to scream. But I didn't. Because when a mother's heart breaks, she doesn't always shout. Sometimes she plans. And what I planned wasn't revenge. It was justice. Quiet, patient, and absolute. Before we begin, if stories like this speak to you, about truth, family, and the quiet strength that never fades, take a second to subscribe, leave a like, and share it with someone who still believes in dignity. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And have you ever seen a mother's silence become her loudest answer? Now let's begin. It happened on a Monday morning. The kind of morning that feels too quiet, too still. I made my usual cup of coffee, sat by the kitchen window, and opened the banking app on my phone. The screen blinked for a second, then froze on a single line of text that made my stomach drop. Available balance, $0. First I thought it was a glitch. I closed the app, reopened it, rubbed my eyes, tried again. Same line, same zero. I called the bank, still half believing there had to be some mistake. The hold music played forever. That annoying piano tune looping like it was mocking me. When a woman finally answered, her voice was polite, mechanical. Mrs. Whitman, the transactions were made online. Wire transfers to an account under the name of Andrew Whitman. I froze. For a moment I didn't breathe. That's my son, I said. The woman hesitated, maybe waiting for me to deny it, to tell her it couldn't be right. But I didn't. I just stared at the phone, the words hanging in the air like smoke I couldn't clear. Would you like to file a fraud report, ma'am? She asked. I hung up. The house went silent again, except for the ticking of the old wall clock in the kitchen and the soft hum of the fridge. The air felt heavier, as if the whole room knew something I didn't want to accept. My hands were shaking, not because I'm old, but because some things you can't prepare your heart for no matter your age. I sat down on the same chair I bought when Andrew turned 7. Back then it was new, soft, warm. Now it sagged under me just like my faith in people. I placed my phone on the table, screen still glowing that cruel little 0, and whispered, he took my money. But he also took my peace. That's when the landline rang. Only one person still called that phone. Hello? Helen, it's Martha. Honey, have you seen Andrew's post? I swallowed. What post? Oh girl, he's in Rome. With Tanya and her mama. Eating fancy food, drinking wine by some fountain. What's it called? Trevi, I think. Lord, he looks like a movie star. For a second I couldn't speak. My tongue felt too heavy. Rome, I finally said, like the word itself had a bitter taste. He's in Rome. When the call ended I just sat there staring at nothing. The house creaked around me. The afternoon light slid across the floor, touching the photos on the wall. The ones of him as a boy, missing teeth, smiling like the world couldn't hurt him. I picked up my old photo album, the one with fingerprints from both of us still visible on the corners. And suddenly it came back to me. One small memory that burned brighter than all the rest. He was 6, maybe 7, sitting at the kitchen table with his tongue sticking out in concentration, trying to write his name for the first time. His tiny hand wrapped around the pencil, mine wrapped around his. Remember, sweetheart, I told him, never take what isn't yours. Always earn it. He looked up at me with those big brown eyes and said, I promise, Mom. I believed him. Now, decades later, he was raising a champagne glass in Rome, smiling that same smile, but it wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to someone else, to another life I didn't recognize. I reached out and touched the screen like I could feel the warmth of his cheek through it. For a second I imagined the little boy he used to be, standing next to the man who forgot him. Maybe they'd look at each other, and one of them would ask, "When did we stop being us?" Outside, the evening breeze pushed against the window. Somewhere down the street, a radio played an old love song, the kind that makes you remember things you wish you could forget. I turned off my phone, closed my eyes, and breathed in the silence. It didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like the beginning of something I couldn't name yet. And before I stood up, I said out loud, softly but certain, "He may have taken everything I had, but he's about to learn what I still have left." If you've ever given everything to someone and watched them throw it away, stay with me. You'll understand why silence can sometimes speak louder than revenge. I was 15 when I first started working. Not because I wanted to, but because someone had to. My mother was sick and the bills didn't care about how young I was. So while other girls were figuring out what color to paint their nails, I was scrubbing floors in houses that smelled like perfume and fresh bread. Smells I could never take home with me. Every Friday, I'd hand my pay envelope to my mom. She'd cry and say I shouldn't have to grow up so fast. But that's what life does to some of us. It doesn't wait until we're ready. Years later, I thought I'd finally found a break. I met a man who said he'd take care of me. We married, and for a little while I believed him. Then one morning he packed his bags and left a note on the kitchen table that said, "You'll be fine, Helen. You always are." Andrew was only 2. There's a kind of silence that follows abandonment. It's not loud, not angry. It's just hollow. I remember standing in that same kitchen, looking at my son's face, and realizing I couldn't afford to be sad. So I wiped my tears, tied my hair back, and took 2 jobs. Day shift cleaning offices, night shift washing dishes. I used to tell myself it's only for now, but now lasted 20 years. Every morning I packed lunch for Andrew: white bread, 1 slice of ham, sometimes a cookie if I could spare it. For me it was dry bread and tap water. That was enough. Watching him eat was my meal. When he turned 18, I sold the only piece of land my father had left me. He'd worked it with his bare hands. I sold it for half its worth because tuition was due, and I couldn't bear the thought of my boy dropping out. I remember holding the deed, whispering, "This is for your future." I just didn't know his future wouldn't include me. He got into college, an accounting program in the city. I was so proud. I told everyone at the diner, "My son's going to be somebody." I didn't know that somebody would one day forget who helped him get there. Then she appeared, Tanya, beautiful in a cold sort of way, like glass. The first time she came to my house, she wore a white dress that didn't have a single wrinkle, not one. She looked around, smiled politely, and said, "It's cozy." Her mother, Rhonda, followed behind her, dripping in perfume so strong it made the air taste like chemicals. Rhonda looked me up and down, smiled with her teeth but not her eyes, and said, "You did a fine job raising him, Mrs. Whitman. We'll take it from here. Take it from here." Like my life's work was a baton to be handed over. I laughed softly, pretending I didn't understand what she meant. But I did. Women like her always talk in sentences that sound polite but sting underneath. After that, Andrew started visiting less. First it was once a week, then every other week, then months. I told myself he was busy building his life. Isn't that what every mother wants? To see her child grow, even if it means watching from afar? But the truth? It felt like standing outside a house you built, watching someone else live in it. Sometimes at night I'd find myself staring at the ceiling, whispering to no one I gave him everything. And all I got in return was distance. No one gives out trophies for mothers like me. There's no applause, no standing ovation. Just silence and more work. Always more work. I remember one Sunday I went to visit him unannounced. I'd made his favorite chicken pot pie. The doorman at his apartment looked at me like I was lost. He said, "Sorry ma'am, they asked not to have visitors unless scheduled." I stood there, holding that warm pie in my hands until it went cold. When I finally walked home, I left it on a park bench. Stray dog ate it. At least someone got to enjoy it. That night I told myself I was being dramatic. That maybe he'd call, maybe he'd visit next week. But weeks became months. And the only time my phone lit up with his name was when he needed something signed or transferred. And every time I said yes. Because that's what mothers do, we keep saying yes even when the world tells us to stop. I didn't know it yet, but the story I'd been writing for decades, the one where sacrifice earns love, was about to change. Because sometimes love doesn't get rewarded. Sometimes it just gets spent like money that never comes back. And I had spent all of mine. At first it was small things, little changes I told myself not to overthink. Tanya started handling the bills to make things easier. Then she changed the online banking password. When I asked for it, she smiled that tight, polite smile of hers and said, "Oh Helen, you don't need to worry about all that. Online banking is confusing for people your age." People your age. I'd spent my whole life counting every dollar to make sure my son never went hungry. And now I was apparently too old to understand where my own money was going. Andrew didn't say anything. He just stood there beside her, pretending not to notice how small I looked in that living room that used to be ours. After that, the visits stopped. Tanya said they were too busy with work, that it was healthier if we talked less. She even asked me not to stop by without calling first, said it stressed Andrew out. Stressed him out. I used to walk through snowstorms just to bring him lunch when he forgot it at school. But now showing up at his door was considered stressful. So we talked on the phone. Short calls. Awkward pauses. His voice started sounding like a stranger's, careful, distant. "I'll visit soon, Mom," he'd say. But soon became never. Then one day the bank statement didn't come. It always arrived on the third Thursday of the month. Always. I waited thinking maybe the mail was late. By the next week something in me twisted. Call it instinct. Mothers know when something's wrong. I went to see Walter, an old friend from my neighborhood. He used to be a lawyer before his hands got too shaky to sign papers. Still sharp, though sharper than anyone I knew. He opened the door with a smile. "Helen Whitman. It's been what, 20 years? Closer to 30, I said. "I need your help." He made coffee, poured mine into the chipped mug he always saved for guests. I slid the stack of bank receipts across the table. "Can you look at these? Something doesn't feel right." He adjusted his glasses, scanning the pages, his eyebrows drawing closer and closer. "Did you authorize any new accounts?" "No." "Or sign anything recently?" "No." He turned one page toward me and tapped it. "Then what's this?" It was a printed form, joint account authorization. My name, my address, my signature. Except it wasn't my signature. My chest went cold. "That's not mine." Walter didn't speak right away. He just kept staring at the paper. Then he said quietly, "Helen, they forged this. It's been active for months." The room spun. For a second I thought I might faint. Who could have? He didn't let me finish. "You know who?" I looked down at the page again at those shaky fake loops pretending to be me. My hand went numb. You wouldn't. Walter sighed, pushing the paper closer until it brushed my fingers. They killed you on paper before you died in flesh. That sentence, God, it landed like a punch. I wanted to scream, but the air wouldn't move in my throat. I just sat there staring at that fake version of my name, wondering when my son had turned into a man who could erase his own mother with a pen. Walter kept talking, something about legal options, fraud reports, evidence. I didn't hear much. My mind was stuck on one thought. He did this to me. My boy, the one I carried, the one I fed when I couldn't afford to feed myself. When I finally spoke, my voice didn't sound like mine anymore. What happens next? He hesitated. You could take this to court, but it'll take time. And pain. A lot of pain. I nodded. Pain doesn't scare me. Losing myself does. Back home, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The clock ticked steady as always. The air was thick with quiet. I opened my old notebook, the one I used to write grocery lists and reminders in. Instead, I wrote just one line. My son didn't die, but the mother in me did. I closed the book and ran my fingers over the cover. My hands looked older than I remembered, veins showing, skin thin like paper. Maybe that's what life does. It keeps taking pieces of you until you don't recognize what's left. Outside, the sun was setting. The light hit the wall just right, casting two shadows, mine and the one from the chair across from me. For a second, I almost saw him there, the little boy I used to read bedtime stories to. His head resting on my shoulder, his small voice asking, "Mom, will we always be together?" And I had said, "Always, sweetheart." But always has an expiration date, doesn't it? I folded the forged document, placed it neatly in a brown envelope, and tucked it into the drawer beside my notebook. Not out of fear, but out of resolve. The world had just told me something I never wanted to hear. Love without boundaries can destroy you. And I wasn't about to let that happen again. I didn't scream. I didn't break anything. I didn't even ask why. There's a point where pain burns so long it stops making noise. That's where I was. I sat at my kitchen table, the same spot where I used to help Andrew with his homework, and opened my notebook. The page was clean, waiting for me to decide what came next. I picked up my pen and wrote one sentence. This silence will teach louder than words. Then I underlined it once. That was enough. The phone buzzed beside me. Tanya's name flashed on the screen. For a moment I almost didn't answer. Curiosity is a dangerous thing, but I pressed accept. Her voice was bright, like she was calling from a world where nothing ever goes wrong. "Pelin, you'll never guess, we're moving to Spain next month. Andrew got a lead on a job there. Isn't that exciting?" Spain. She said it like it was some magical word. I could almost see her there, dressed in white, sunglasses perched on her head, sipping wine bought with the years I'd worked myself raw for. "That's nice," I said softly. She laughed, that high, careless laugh. "Oh, you should come visit sometime. Though I'm not sure you'd enjoy it. Europe's not really built for small-town people." I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "You're right," I said. "It's not." When the call ended, I just sat there. The house was quiet except for the whistle of the old kettle on the stove. I made tea, poured it into my chipped floral mug, and let it sit until it turned lukewarm. That night something shifted. I wasn't the same woman who begged the universe for mercy. I wasn't the mother who still believed love could fix everything. No, something inside me hardened. Not with anger, but with clarity. Mothers like me don't plan revenge. We plan closure. So I began to work. Not loudly. Not dramatically, just efficiently. Every morning I wrote down times, dates, bank statements, tiny details that didn't mean much alone, but together they told a story. I photocopied receipts, printed emails, saved voice messages. My dining table slowly turned into a quiet battlefield. Paper instead of weapons, ink instead of blood. I went to the bank under the pretense of updating my information. While the clerk typed, I asked casual questions, enough to learn what I needed, not enough to raise suspicion. Walter came by later that week. When he saw the piles of notes, his eyebrows shot up. "You've been busy," he said. "I don't sleep much these days," I told him. He flipped through the documents, impressed despite himself. "You're building a case." "No," I said. "I'm building peace." Every night before bed, I brewed a cup of chamomile tea and sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker on. Somewhere across the ocean, my son was probably laughing, drinking, living a life that didn't include me. And yet, for the first time in months, I didn't feel hollow. Because knowledge is a strange kind of comfort. When you finally see the truth, you stop begging for explanations. You start preparing for outcomes. One evening, I opened my notebook again. The same one where I'd written my silence down. I flipped to a fresh page and wrote, "I was never rich, but now I'm wealthy in truth." I set the pen down and traced the words with my fingertip. It was true. For so many years I had mistaken survival for weakness. I'd confused sacrifice with love. But truth, that was something entirely different. Truth didn't make you softer. It made you solid. As the days went by, the fear that once kept me small began to fade. I could feel it in the way I moved slower, yes, but steadier. I had no reason to rush anymore. Every step I took was measured, deliberate. Walter called to check in. "You sure you want to go through with all this?" I smiled into the phone. "I've already gone through worse." There was a pause. "You always were stronger than you looked." "No," I said. "I just learned to be quiet enough to hear myself think." After that, I spent hours sorting through papers, marking what mattered, discarding what didn't. The act of it, the precision, the patience, felt almost holy. I was rewriting the story they tried to erase me from. And through it all, I didn't cry. Tears, I'd realized, were a luxury for people who still had something left to lose. I didn't. All I had now was resolve. One night, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window. I looked older, yes, but also unshakable. The same eyes, but a different woman behind them. For the first time in a long time, I whispered to myself, "You're going to be okay." Then, as if to seal the promise, I lifted my mug in a quiet toast to no one in particular and said, "To the end of crying." The tea had gone cold, but I drank it anyway. Because sometimes, peace doesn't come from forgiveness. Comes from finally deciding you're done bleeding for people who keep cutting you. The doctor's lips were still moving, but for a moment the words didn't reach me. The room felt too bright, too white. Like the kind of place where bad news always sounds rehearsed. His mouth finally landed on the words that would change everything. "You have leukemia, Mrs. Whitman. 6 months, maybe less." 6 months. It should have sounded like a countdown, but it didn't. It sounded like an appointment. Something that had already been on the calendar. I just hadn't checked the date yet. I nodded slowly, almost politely. 6 months? I said, trying to steady my voice. Then I have 6 months to make things right. He blinked as if waiting for the tears, the panic, the bargaining. But they didn't come. I didn't ask about treatments or statistics. I'd already spent too much of my life fighting for things that weren't worth keeping. He cleared his throat. "We can start chemotherapy right away, but it's aggressive. Painful. It might extend your life by a few months, but I interrupted gently. Does it make me live longer or just make dying slower? He hesitated. That depends on how you define living. That was my answer. I smiled, not out of joy but out of peace. Then no, I don't want to die hooked up to a machine. I want to finish what I started. I stood up, thanked him, and walked out of the clinic into the kind of afternoon that feels too normal for the kind of news you've just heard. The sky was pale blue, kids were laughing somewhere in the distance, and for a second I thought, the world doesn't stop for anyone, does it? As I walked home, my reflection appeared in every shop window, smaller, slower, but still me. Still Helen. The same woman who used to scrub offices at midnight, who stretched $1 into 3 meals, who built a life out of scraps and hope. I once feared dying poor. Now I fear dying forgotten. That thought stayed with me all the way home. It sat beside me on the bus, followed me through the door, and lingered in the quiet hum of the refrigerator. Dying didn't scare me anymore. Being erased did. That night I opened every drawer, every box. Old bills, photos, receipts. My life in paper form. I tore up what didn't matter and kept what did. Not out of nostalgia but out of purpose. I wasn't preparing to leave. I was preparing to be remembered. The next morning Walter stopped by. He looked worried. I could see it in his eyes before he said a word. You shouldn't have walked home alone after that appointment, he said. I shrugged. I've walked home alone from worse places. He didn't laugh. Helen, you need to rest. I'll rest when I'm done, I said, handing him the stack of documents I'd been organizing. We're filing the papers. All of them. The fraud, the forged signature, the transfers, everything. Walter looked at me like he wanted to argue. But then he saw something in my face that stopped him. Are you sure you want to spend your time on this? I'm sure, I said. It's not about money anymore. It's about truth. He nodded slowly, knowing there was no changing my mind. For the next few days I moved through the world like someone who'd already made peace with leaving it. I cleaned the house, but not out of habit, out of meaning. Every photo I kept had a reason. Every letter I sealed had a purpose. I cooked small meals, drank my tea slowly, and found comfort in ordinary sounds. The ticking clock, the rustle of wind against the window, the creak of the old rocking chair that still smelled faintly of my late husband's cologne. I thought about Andrew sometimes, about the little boy who used to run barefoot through the hallway, laughing like the world was made just for him. I wondered if he'd feel it when I was gone. Not guilt, but absence. The kind that sits heavy like something missing from the air. I hope so. One evening, I sat with Walter in his office as he filled out the last of the legal forms. He handed me a pen. Sign here, he said gently. I signed my name steady and clear. For once it felt powerful to see it on paper, to know it couldn't be forged this time. Walter looked up from the documents. You know, this might not fix everything. I smiled. Doesn't have to. I just need it to fix me. When I walked home that night, the air smelled like rain. The streets glistened under the streetlights, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel afraid. There was something beautiful about knowing the end had a date. It made every moment sharper. Every sound, every breath, every heartbeat felt like a small miracle. 6 months. That's what the doctor said. But in truth, I'd been dying for years. Dying in silence, dying under someone else's shadow. Now, for the first time, I felt alive again. I boiled water, poured myself a cup of tea, and whispered almost to the steam, let's get to work. Because if time was all I had left, then time was what I would use. To clean the mess, to reclaim my name, and to make sure that when I finally closed my eyes, the world would remember exactly who Helen Whitman was. I bought the notebook on a Thursday. Small leather-bound deep red, the kind of red that makes you stop for a second when you see it. It felt heavier than it should have, like it already knew it was going to hold more than words. When I got home, I made tea, sat by the window, and opened to the first blank page. My hands were steady. I picked up my pen and wrote, "This is not revenge. It's justice." Then I closed the cover and smiled just a little. It wasn't the smile of someone who'd won. It was the smile of someone who'd finally stopped losing. The next morning I called Walter. "It's time," I said. He didn't ask what I meant. He already knew. We met at his office, the same one that still smelled faintly of old books and stronger coffee. He had the documents ready. The fraud report, the power of attorney forms, and the complaint about elder financial abuse. We signed every page slowly, deliberately. When we were done, Walter leaned back in his chair and looked at me. "You sure you want to go through with this?" "I'm sure," I said. "They took everything but my dignity. I'm just taking that back." He nodded. "Then let's give them hell." Within days, the investigation began. The bank froze every account Andrew and Tanya touched. Credit cards declined, transactions blocked, phones buzzing with alerts they didn't understand yet. I didn't celebrate. I didn't even watch the news. I simply wrote in my red notebook, "Silence works." But karma, she works too in her own quiet way. A week later, Walter called me, his voice carrying a strange mix of pity and satisfaction. "You might want to hear this," he said. "Your daughter-in-law's been questioned by Interpol. Money laundering. Transfers between Europe and the States. Looks like her mother's involved too." I didn't react. I just listened. He continued, "They're both on the run now. No one knows where they went. Andrew's been left behind. His accounts are frozen. His so-called friends won't touch him. Guess loyalty has an expiration date when the money's gone." For a moment I closed my eyes and saw it all in my mind. Tanya in her designer coat, Rhonda clutching her purse, both of them realizing the party was over. No more champagne. No more pretending. I should have felt anger, maybe even triumph. But what I felt was peace. Because this wasn't about getting even anymore. It was about balance. The kind that life eventually restores no matter how long it takes. That night I opened the notebook again. I wrote, "They took what wasn't theirs and it cost them what they couldn't afford." I poured myself another cup of tea, the same way I had every night for years. Steam curled up like smoke, catching the glow of the kitchen light. I thought about how strange justice can be. How it doesn't shout, doesn't arrive in bright lights. It just shows up quietly when you stopped expecting it. Meanwhile, across the ocean, the story was unfolding like something out of a movie. Tanya's texts leaked. "We'll ditch him after Spain. He's not worth the trouble once we're set. The internet loves a scandal." Screenshots spread fast. And in the middle of it all, Andrew. I heard he tried calling me. I didn't answer. What could I say? That I'd warned him 100 times that love built on greed doesn't last? That the people who use others eventually use each other too? No. I'd said enough in my silence. I did imagine his face though. The disbelief, the shame, the loneliness. Maybe he was sitting in some expensive hotel room that suddenly didn't feel so grand. Maybe he was realizing for the first time what it meant to lose something money couldn't buy. I turned a new page in my notebook and wrote, "Justice isn't loud, it's steady." Days passed and the headlines faded. People moved on as they always do. But I didn't need the world to remember. I only needed to know that somewhere in some quiet corner of his mind, Andrew remembered who he used to be. The boy who once held my hand and promised he'd never hurt me. Now he had to live with the man he'd become. I closed the notebook, tied it shut with its thin red ribbon, and placed it on the shelf beside my teacups. To anyone else it would look like an ordinary journal. But to me it was a record of truth. A ledger that didn't count dollars, only lessons. I took one last sip of tea and whispered into the stillness, "You don't always have to fight to win. Sometimes you just have to stop losing." And then softer, almost like a prayer, "Silence works." They told him to come to the U.S. Embassy at 9 sharp. No explanation, just a formal notice with his full name printed in bold letters. Andrew Whitman. He showed up in a pressed shirt, the kind he probably couldn't afford anymore. The marble floors reflected the light like mirrors, too bright, too clean. The kind of place where truth has nowhere to hide. He waited by the front desk, pacing. Then the officer said, "Mr. Whitman, this way, please." He followed down a long hallway, each step echoing louder than the last. At the end of it was a conference room. Fluorescent lights hummed. No music, no sound but the low whir of the air conditioner. And then the door opened. I stepped in. He froze, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. For a second he didn't seem to recognize me. Maybe because I looked different, smaller, thinner, but steadier than he remembered. "Mom," he said, voice cracking just enough to sound like the boy he used to be. "What are you doing here?" I looked at him, my son, the man who had once fit in the crook of my arm, now standing across from me like a stranger. "I think the real question," I said softly, "is what you did." His jaw clenched. "Mom, what did you do?" "I didn't take from you," I said. "I just stopped you from taking from me." He blinked, confused at first, then it hit him. His face went pale. The officer handed over a folder, thick with papers, bank records, transfers, forged signatures. All of it laid bare under the cold embassy lights. He flipped through the pages, his hands shaking. You reported me?" "No," I said quietly. "I reported the truth. Just happened to involve you." The room was so still you could hear the faint click of a pen as the officer signed one of the forms. That tiny sound cut through the air like thunder. Andrew turned toward me, tears forming but never falling. "You ruined me," he whispered. I met his eyes. "No. You did that the day you forgot who raised you." The officer stepped aside to let us speak privately. For a moment, we were just two people standing on opposite sides of a bridge that had already burned. "I was your life, Mom," he said desperately. "Everything I did was for us." I shook my head, slow and steady. "You were my life, Andrew. But I was never yours." That sentence, he looked like it hit him straight in the chest. His lips parted like he wanted to argue, to explain, but nothing came out. Just silence. Somewhere behind us a tourist was filming. Maybe they thought it was just some dramatic family moment in a government building. They didn't know it was the end of a lifetime. Later I found out that clip went viral. People called it the quiet justice moment. The video was shaky, camera trembling, light bouncing off the polished floor. My reflection half visible as I stood there. The caption someone added read, "She didn't raise her voice. She raised her truth." In the video you can see the exact moment he breaks. His shoulders fall, his eyes drop, and he realizes it's over. Not just the money, not just the lies, but the version of him I used to believe in. He said nothing else. Neither did I. When the officer escorted me out, the sound of my shoes against the tile felt louder than anything we'd said. Outside, the Roman sunlight hit me in the face. too bright after the sterile white of that room. I took a deep breath and let it sting my eyes. Behind me the door closed with a soft click. I didn't turn back. There was no music, no applause, no grand ending. Just that moment of silence that felt cleaner than forgiveness. On the ride back to my hotel, I opened my red notebook and wrote one last line for the day. Truth doesn't need to shout, just needs to be heard once. I closed the book, set it on my lap, and watched the city blur by outside the window. Somewhere inside that building, my son was probably still sitting there, head down, the papers spread across the table like pieces of a life he couldn't put back together. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel angry. I just felt free. When I came back to the States, the air felt different, thinner, colder. Maybe it was me that had changed. Maybe I just learned what quiet really sounds like. The doctors were right. The illness was spreading fast. I could feel it in my bones, in the way my hands trembled when I poured tea, in the shortness of my breath when I climbed the stairs. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I'd done what I came to do. The truth was out there and I finally had peace. The red notebook sat on my nightstand, its cover a little worn now, corners curled from use. I opened to a blank page and began to write. My handwriting was slower than before, shakier, but steady enough to finish the thought that had been sitting in my heart for months. If you ever see your mother in another woman's eyes, don't fail her. I paused, smiled to myself, and added one more line. Something softer, something only a mother could write. I still believe in you, son. That was the last thing I ever wrote. The next morning, my neighbor Martha came by to bring me groceries, like she always did. She said she found me sitting in my favorite chair by the window, the morning sun on my face, the red notebook on my lap, and a half-finished cup of tea beside me. Still warm but not hot. My eyes were closed, peaceful, like I just drifted into sleep. Word spread fast in the neighborhood. People came by, left flowers, shared stories about how I used to help fix their curtains, or bring soup when they were sick. Simple things, quiet things, the kind of things that don't make headlines but make homes. And then a week later Andrew came. No entourage, no fancy suit, just a man with tired eyes and a bouquet of white lilies. He let himself in with the spare key Martha gave him. He found the red notebook where I'd left it. He sat in the same chair I used to sit in every evening, flipped through the pages slowly, reading every word I'd written. My handwriting stopped halfway through the last page. He traced the line with his thumb, the ink smudged slightly. When he reached the last sentence, "I still believe in you, son." He broke. Not with anger, not with regret, just grief. He put the notebook down, covered his face with his hands, and cried. Not the quiet kind, but the kind that sounds like something breaking open after years of being shut tight. The house didn't echo with it. It absorbed it like it understood. Outside, the wind blew through the porch chimes, soft and steady. Martha told me later, well, told others really, that he stayed there for hours just sitting staring out the window. She said he comes every morning now, brings flowers, never knocks. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's how healing begins. Not with apologies or big gestures, but with silence and showing up. Sometimes love doesn't sound like words. Sometimes it sounds like footsteps on the porch at dawn, the rustle of flowers being laid on a table, or the soft click of a notebook closing for the last time. The parent's silence can be the loudest lesson. If you're listening to this, tell me, where are you watching from? And have you ever known a mother like her? Because somewhere out there, there's always another Helen. Another mother who gave everything. asked for nothing, and left behind something louder than her voice, her quiet truth.